The jet was still cooling on the private runway when Adrian Vale told the driver to skip the motorcade and take the side road home. A midsummer squall had swept the coast, flinging nails of rain across the windshield and scraping the sky with slate-gray fingernails. He should have been in Shanghai already, dining with investors who wore patience like a trophy. Instead, a canceled negotiation and a missed connection had dropped him, unannounced, into his own city, his own house, an ice palace of marble and glass that knew his footsteps better than it knew his voice. The mansion greeted him with quiet that hummed, the way a conch shell holds the sea. As the oak doors swung inward, motion sensors woke lights one by one, runway beacons that painted the hallway the color of paper money. Adrian stepped from shadow to gold to shadow again, shrugging off the scent of jet fuel, the bargain and combat of boardrooms, and the image of his son, Theo, eating dinner alone in a dining room so long it had its own echo. He had not called ahead. He never called ahead. Surprise? He liked to believe, kept people honest. He was halfway up the staircase when he heard a sound he did not recognize in his house, a thread of muse and laughter, liquid as a creek after rain. It wasn't the televised laughter of his niece playing cartoons in a guest suite, nor the mechanical chirp of alerts. It was human, soft, feathered with relief. Adrian froze. One hand on the rail, another sound followed the uncertain, delighted syllables of a boy, his boy, unspooling into something bright, like sunlight breaking free of clouds. He moved quickly and quietly, the way he used to move through the trading floor when a storm was coming, and followed the sound down a short corridor that smelled faintly of oiled wood and that lemon polish the housekeeper liked. The study door stood ajar. A line of warm lamplight lay across the corridor like an invitation. He pushed the door with 2 fingers. Inside, the room had been transformed. The fireplace glowed with embers. The storm's tinny percussion on the window panes had softened to a hush. On the Persian rug lay a quilt he did not recognize, hand-stitched and uneven in a way that made the whole room feel warmer. Beside the window, near the baby grand that had belonged to his late wife, sat Maya the maid, the young woman with ink-blue eyes and a quiet way of moving as if she were perpetually apologizing for taking up space. She wore a faded sweater, sleeves pushed to the elbows, and the careful alertness of someone always measuring exit routes. Theo's head rested against Maya's shoulder, his cheeks pinked by the fire. He was laughing a real laugh, not the brittle thing the tutors coaxed from him in exchange for stickers. On the quilt near their feet, a pair of newborn twins slept in a second-hand bassinet that looked incongruously tender against the ruthlessly curated room. One twin's fist had escaped its blanket and waved in the air as if conducting the rain. Both breathed with that small, serious patience of new life, tiny chests rising and falling like punctuation. Maya looked up when the door clicked. For the briefest fragment of a second, joy and terror chased across her face, as if she were a child caught stealing sugar. She shifted as though to stand, but Theo's fingers clutched the fabric at her shoulder. He whispered something. A word. Maybe 2. Adrian could not make it out. His chest tightened as though an invisible hand had closed around it. "What is this?" he said, and he heard the winter in his voice. Everything in him came to attention. The investor, the young man who had clawed his way out of scarcity like a swimmer beating a riptide, the father whose love had grown barbed from fear. "What are you doing in my study with my son? And who?" He gestured, almost imperceptibly. "At the bassinet. Who are they?" Maya lifted her chin. She did not set Theo down. She did not beg. She did not look away. "Mr. Vale," she said, careful, composed. "You're home early." The understatement lit a fuse in him. He took 2 steps into the room. The fire hissed as if in warning. "Answer me. They're sleeping," Maya whispered, angling her body protectively. So Theo and the twins were all in the umbrella of her small frame. "Please, lower your voice." He almost laughed. In his boardrooms, men quieted when he raised his voice, and when he lowered it. In this room, an employee dared to ask him to soften. He opened his mouth to insist on rules, boundaries, security protocols that were the nervous system of his house. But Theo turned toward him then, eyes wide in a face that still sometimes looked too much like the woman Adrian had loved and lost. Theo's lips moved. The sound that came next was not laughter. It was a word, small as a pin, yet sharp enough to pierce the dark that had wrapped itself around the boy's throat for 2 long years. Dad. For months after the funeral, Theo had folded into himself and stopped speaking, as if sound itself were an injury. Therapists had called it selective mutism, grief manifesting as a locked door. Tutors had slid flashcards under that door and waited. The door had stayed shut, and now Dad spoken not to him, but from a shelter beneath another's arm. "You brought infants into my home," he said. But his voice had hollowed. Without permission, Maya nodded. Yes. Why, the word came out like a verdict. Because he was afraid of the thunder. She looked down at Theo. And because I didn't have anyone to leave them with. And because music helps. The thunder rolled again. Low and distant. In the bassinet, one twin snuffled but did not wake. The other made a small, squeaking sigh. Something unclenched in Adrian, then clenched again. "Who gave you the right?" he asked, quietly now, dangerously so, "to decide what helps my son?" There it was, the sharp edge of him, the blade he'd sharpened on years of having to be tougher, faster, more accurate than the next man. The corner of Maya's mouth trembled, but only for a second. "No one gave it to me," she said. "He did, by taking my hand." Theo, still folded against her, nodded once, a tiny, decisive gesture, like a signature. Outside, the storm set one last nail of rain against the window and was gone. Inside, 3 children breathed. The fire whispered, and 2 adults faced each other across a room that felt smaller than it had ever been. Adrian realized his hands were trembling. He tucked them into his pockets so no one would see. By morning, the storm had rinsed the city clean. Sunlight spilled over the ocean like syrup, and the gulls made a racket on the seawall, as if gossiping about the ships. From the rooftop terrace, Adrian's house looked like an illustration of certainty, the clipped geometry of hedges, the exactness of shadow at 10 o'clock, the staff moving through routines with the choreography of a well-trained orchestra. Inside him, however, a single unscripted night had rearranged something essential. Adrian Vale did not believe in accident. He believed in pressure, in yield, in leverage and loss. He had built Vale Holdings before he was 35, stacking acquisitions like glass panes, making a tower so tall he could pretend not to see the ground. The magazines called him the architect of the invisible money-moving money, data courting data. They wrote about the penthouses, the yachts, the kind of watches that whispered their own value. What they did not write about was the hollow. His mother's rent arrears had worn into him when he was 12, or the night he learned power is often another word for not being afraid you'll be asked to leave. At 42, Adrian wore success like armor, tailored suits that moved like water, eyes the color of a winter sky, a jawline honed by mornings on a Peloton he despised. He was handsome in the way men in expensive ads were handsome, but the ad was for distance. The only time warmth seeped into him was when he looked at Theo. And even then, it was a warmth laced with fear, because love was a house you could lose in a fire, the house itself. The Vale house sat on a curve of coastline that made cartographers smile. Its facade was a lesson in restraint. Its interiors were curated by a woman who had understood the alchemy of light and fabric. Elise Vale, dead 2 years now, had made home into an art. Her music still haunted the corners, little phrases caught in the banister, a cord hanging in the air above the staircase like a note trapped beneath glass. Picture frames showed her laughing at something just out of frame, or standing with her hand in Adrian's in a way that suggested they had built something no wind could take. Theo moved through this world like a small satellite searching for gravity. He had his father's bone structure and his mother's eyes, which made looking at him a soft cruelty. The tutors said he was bright, brighter than their carefully laminated charts could measure. The therapists said grief at his age was a fog that burned off slowly if you were patient. Adrian tried to be patient, but patience felt too much like helplessness, and helplessness was a continent he had sworn never to visit again. Maya Rivera lived 2 bus rides and a walk from the ocean. The apartment she rented was so small she had to choose between a crib and a table, and the table lost. There were 3 plants on the windowsill that tried their best, and a calendar above the stove with saints drawn like comic book heroes. She had a wooden spoon from her grandmother, and a pair of boots that had been repaired more times than she could count, and a battered phone that kept on living out of stubbornness. On the wall, propped on a nail, was a photograph of her mother in a dress the color of hope. The twins' father existed now only as a kindness in memory and a silence in conversation. Before the twins, Maya had worked doubles at a diner where she could smell pancakes even when she was off shift. The tips were unpredictable, more generous when the tourists felt like absolving themselves. She had learned that kindness and condescension could wear the same smile. After the twins, Luna and Leo, who had arrived on a windy morning with matching dimples, and the astonishing gravity of new people she had taken the job at Vale House because it came with regular hours, health insurance, and the odd blessing of quiet. On her first day, the head housekeeper had pressed a list into her hands and a uniform against her chest. The Vales like quiet. The woman had said, they like surfaces that do not remember touch. They like people who move like breeze. Maya had nodded and learned to fold the linen the way the linen demanded to be folded. She learned the rhythm of the house, the caterer's vans like swans in the driveway, the florist who called every peony by name, the security guard who joked that the cameras were better company than most people. She learned that there were rooms in which sound was not welcome, and rooms in which sound was a blessing, and that Adrian Vale's study was the place where his walls were most honest. She learned that Theo's silence wasn't empty. It was dense, like the pause before a downbeat in a symphony. She had not meant to bring the twins that night. Childcare had fallen through. Her neighbor had called with a cracked voice her own baby had a fever. It was a storm. They said on the radio that would be over quickly. Theo had been in the hallway with his shoulders near his ears, like someone waiting for a blow. Maya had done the math that single mothers did the cost of a taxi she couldn't afford versus the cost of staying and risking a boss's anger versus the cost of walking away and leaving a boy to navigate thunder with only his breath. She chose as if the choice were obvious. In the morning, She dressed the twins in their warmest onesies and waited in the small staff kitchen, hoping to catch the head housekeeper before Adrian saw her. She sipped terrible coffee while Luna gurgled at the ceiling, and Leo discovered his toes and tried to find a version of the truth that wouldn't sound like a confession. She didn't have to wait long. Adrian appeared in the doorway like the answer to a hard question. The light behind him made a halo of his silhouette, but the expression he wore was not saintly. He looked like a man who could move markets with a shrug. "We talk in the study," he said. The study, in daylight, was less forgiving than it had been under firelight. Sun seeped in around the blinds and turned the dust to gold confetti. The bassinet was gone. The quilt was folded. The piano wore its lid like a closing eye. Adrian took his chair behind the desk, a piece of furniture that looked like it expected treaties to be signed upon it. "Tell me who you are," he said, as if the personnel file did not exist, as if knowing her were a risk he'd taken. Maya swallowed. "Maya Rivera, 27. I clean the second and third floors, the study, and assist in the kitchen on weekends. I have 2 children. We live in the Harbor District. Twins. She agreed, feeling both pride and apology in the word. "And last night, she said, and made herself look him in the eye. The storm scared Theo. He asked me not to leave. I didn't have childcare. I thought I could keep them quiet. I was wrong to assume." He tapped a pen against the blotter. Once, twice. The sound was small and sharp, like a nail into wood. "This house is a machine. Everything has a place. We hire people so that other people don't have to improvise." He glanced at the stroller where Leo had fallen asleep, with his mouth open and his hands arranged in surrender. Something in Maya ached. She had known men like this, who believed in machines because they were afraid of the weather. She had also known storms you could not outrun. "Yes, Miss Vale." He nodded as if satisfied by that obedience, then surprised them both. He spoke. He said, not quite able to keep the tremor out of his voice. He said, "He called me Dad." Maya felt her face soften. "He did." She kept her voice gentle. "He's been trying in small words. He likes small words best." Adrian's gaze slid away, then returned as if unused to showing itself. "He spoke to you," Maya said, "because of you." She gestured at the room, the piano, the quilt, the open space where grief could sit down without being asked to leave, "because he trusted me enough to trust you in the room." He went very still. She recognized that stillness. It was what people did when they decided not to cry. "At last," Adrian said. "There will be rules." "Of course," Maya said, and stood straighter. "You will not bring the children again." Maya's hands tightened on the handlebar. She kept her face obedient. "Understood. You will remain with Theo when he asks for you." She blinked. "Understood," she said again, but her voice broke on the second syllable, and she cleared her throat. And Leo sighed in his sleep, as if forgiving both of them their embarrassments. 2 worlds had been drawn and redrawn. The line between them, bright as chalk in the morning, would not stay still. Rules, in the Vale house, were like the grooves on a record. They kept the song true but allowed for music. For a while, the arrangement held. Maya worked the second and third floors like a dancer. The twins at home, with a neighbor whose feverish baby recovered, and whose rent was partly paid with the kind of gratitude that tastes like humility. Theo discovered that the study was safest when the blinds were half open and the piano lid half lifted. Adrian discovered that his email lagged when he lingered in the doorway to listen to a lullaby. Still, tension moved under the floorboards like a second plumbing. It began with small things. A set of cufflinks Emerald glass set in silver went missing from a tray on Adrian's dresser. A bottle of cologne appeared, inexplicably, in the pantry, its gold torso gleaming impertinently from between sacks of flour. A security camera failed at 3 in the morning for exactly 11 minutes and then resumed in perfect clarity, as if it had stepped outside for a cigarette. Victor Raines, Adrian's chief operating officer and oldest friend, alerted him to the cufflinks with the kind of sympathy that looked like service. "We run a tight ship," Victor said, leaning against the desk that had been Elise's favorite. He was a man groomed by money rather than born to it, his tie always a shade too bright, his smile designed for someone else's face, but staff are staff. You know how it is. His gaze flicked to the framed photo of Theo and Elise at the piano. "We can't afford noise right now." Adrian frowned. "Maya has been with us 6 months without a misstep." Victor lifted a shoulder. "All the more reason to keep eyes open." He let the sentence rest a moment, then added, as if tack-stitching it to another thought. "And the camera on the east corridor, the one outside the study, that failure is curious." Adrian said nothing. He thought of the twins sleeping like commas on his study rug. He thought of Theo's hand seeking Maya's sweater hem like a sparrow finding a branch. He thought about accidents and leverage. He agreed to nothing and did not disagree. The next afternoon, the rumors in the staff quarters moved with the coffee. Someone had seen someone carrying something they shouldn't have. Someone had heard that the new maid, pretty, poor, proud, had ideas above her station. The head housekeeper tamped down the talk with a look that would have quieted a parade. Maya kept her head down and her work precise, but she could feel the sharpness of attention on her skin like invisible nettles. Theo sensed the currents the way animals do before weather. He began lingering in hallways near wherever Maya was working, offering help in the way of children who want to save the person who is saving them. He developed an interest in folding towels. He mastered the geometry of pillowcases. He found dozens of small excuses to be where she was, and Maya's Mr. Theo became a refrain that braided comfort and caution. One night when Adrian walked the house to check the locks, a habit he had acquired, as if to compensate for the ways the world refused to be secured, he found Maya in the study rubbing a spot from the piano's lacquer. With the careful ferocity of someone banishing a stain that did not want to be banished. Tears stood in her eyes and did not fall. He said her name, and she startled. Straightening so fast, she bumped the bench. "Mr. Vale, I'm sorry. I know the rule about the music room after 9. He shook his head. Rules flex for grief. He surprised himself with the word and the mercy in it. "What happened?" Maya hesitated, then produced something from her pocket. The emerald cufflinks gleamed in her palm like tiny captive planets. "I found them behind the radiator in the guest room. I was going to bring them to you first thing." He stared. "Behind the radiator?" She nodded, with dust that had to be peeled off like skin. He took the cufflinks and turned them in his fingers. Victor said he cut himself off. He was not sure what he had been about to say, only that it would have sounded like the kind of man he did not want to be in front of her. "Thank you." Maya looked as if the thank you had caught her at a tilt. "Of course. Who put them there?" he asked, as if he were interrogating the room. "I don't know," she said, and the look in her eyes was gentle but tired. "Sometimes things get lost because people are rushing. Sometimes because people want them to be lost." He heard the second sentence for what it was: not a suggestion, not an accusation, only a truth wrapped in observation. He put the cufflinks on the desk, carefully, as if their weight could anchor something that wanted to drift. The next morning, as if the house needed counterpoint, the security logs showed a door to the wine cellar left ajar at 2:14 a.m. No inventory was missing. The camera again glitched for exactly 11 minutes. Victor sent a text. "We are bleeding credibility if you won't cauterize this. I'll handle it if you're too close." Adrian typed and deleted 4 replies. He settled for "I'll handle it." He called Maya to the study at noon. She came with her hair braided back and a clean shirt, and the kind of contained calm one wears to court. He noticed, because he noticed everything, that her hands were not trembling. His were. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "We've had a series of anomalies, missing and found items, camera glitches, doors ajar." He cataloged the facts, like filing, your presence in the study that night, bringing the twins, my son speaking to you, the staff talk. "It adds up to," he broke off. He couldn't make himself say the arithmetic out loud. Maya watched him with an expression that made his throat ache. "It adds up to that I am visible," she said, "and visible women make some people worry." Adrian's jaw tightened. "If someone is trying to hurt you," she smiled, small. "I've been a waitress on payday nights and a mother in a bus station at midnight. Your house is not the first place I've met danger." He found himself smiling back, or at least trying to. "And if someone is trying to use you to hurt my son." The smile vanished. "Then I will notice first." The afternoon darkened. Clouds thickened like a plan. When the storm arrived, it came with a slap of wind and a rapid procession of lightning that skittered seaward. The city blinked. The house's generators shouldered the load like old men who had been waiting for the chance. In the temporary darkness, Maya discovered a letter tucked between the piano scores. Elise's music and Elise's handwriting. But the letter was addressed not to Adrian, not to Theo, but to someone named M. She did not open it. She carried the envelope to Adrian, its paper soft as a breath. He stared at the handwriting like it was proof of a time machine. His face went gray the way dawn goes gray. "M," he said, and for the first time he looked unsure in his house, in his skin. "Who is M?" Maya shook her head. "I don't know, but I think—" She hesitated. "I think I've seen this script before. On the top of music, she left for the community center. She used to teach a class there, on Saturdays." He lifted his eyes very slowly. "You knew Elise, not the way you did," Maya said, "a long time ago, before the twins. I helped clean the rooms at the center in exchange for taking classes. She taught children to listen to themselves. She taught me to play a scale and to forgive the mistakes between notes. She called herself Lissy there. Most people didn't know who she was. She asked us not to say." Adrian's hand closed around the envelope like it was a rope. He looked again at the M. The room held its breath. "We will read this," he said, and he did not say when or how or whether it might change the shape of their luck. Victor knocked then, the courteous staccato of a man who believed in entrances. He took in the scene, the letter, the nearness of Maya, the piano like a witness, and said, lightly, as if offering weather, "We're changing the night roster. I want the staff in and out with sign-offs. No unscheduled hours, no exceptions." Adrian didn't look at him. "She stays." He said, "I'm thinking of optics." Victor said, "The consortium, the donors." The headline writes itself. "Billionaire hires single mother with baggage to serve in his sanctum." "I am not a headline," Maya said, which startled them both because she rarely entered a conversation with her full self. "And he is not a caricature." She lifted her chin a final fraction. "I don't scare easily." Victor's eyes cooled. "Everyone scares." he said. It's just a matter of price. Something darkened in the room. It might have been the storm. It might have been a beginning. They opened the letter together because there was no other way to do it without breaking something important. Adrian slit the paper with a silver blade that lived in his desk and read silently at first, lips moving the way you do when the words are heavier than their ink. Then, at a place where the lines seemed to take his breath, he passed the page to Maya and said, softly, "Read to me. If you are who I think you are, if the world is as small and large as it's felt on those Saturdays at the center, if you are the girl who sat at the back and counted the notes on her fingers until the song found her, then I am writing to thank you for listening. They tell me to prepare for all outcomes, and I try to be brave about the ugliest one. Preparation is not surrender. It's love wearing a backpack. If I am not there when the music comes, please keep the music in the house. Keep it near my boy. He will look like the ocean on storm days. Sit with him anyway. Tell the one I love that some promises can be kept by more than one person." Maya's throat worked. Her hand went to her mouth and stayed there a second too long. She knew, she said, not a question. Adrian nodded once, sharply, like something cracking. "She knew you. I didn't think she even noticed me." Maya whispered, "I was a broom with hands, but she noticed everyone." She kept a box under the piano bench with crayons for people who didn't have language yet. He took the letter back and turned the envelope over in his hands. Inside, in a secret pocket she had made by folding the paper on itself, there was a key, a locker key from a bus station downtown, and a square of staff paper on which Elise had written 2 words in a neat hand that seemed carved into the paper. "For M." The key turned the air in the room to something brighter. "There's more," Adrian said. They went together to the bus station as if they were sneaking out of a life they had not agreed to. Adrian wore a baseball cap that pretended not to be expensive. Maya wore her boots and an old raincoat that had outlived storms. The locker opened with a reluctance that felt like ceremony. Inside lay a stack of manila envelopes and a small, old-fashioned digital recorder with a cracked screen and a tag in Elise's hand. "Songs for Storms." Adrian touched the recorder as if it were a relic. When he pressed play, the locker filled with a ghostly intimacy, the sound of Elise's laugh, the soft settling of a bench, the first notes of a lullaby, and then the instruction. "If you're hearing this, it means I can't be where I want to be. So here I am anyway. Hello, little bird. Hello, stranger who isn't." Maya closed her eyes, and in the dark of her own skull, saw the study glowing like a lantern. Theo's head heavy on her shoulder, the twins arrhythmic with dreams. She saw the 2 words Elise had written on another scrap in the envelope beneath the recorder, Luna and Leo. Next to it, a simple melody line marked for 2 hands. A duet of rising and falling thirds. She wrote them. Maya breathed. She wrote their names in the air before they existed. Adrian looked up, startled. "You're twins." She nodded. "I picked their names because the moon watched me and because the lion is brave, but maybe the names picked me first." The manila envelopes contained letters, recipes for the household rituals Elise had cherished, notes to Theo for birthdays he had not reached yet, and notes to Adrian that looked like prayers disguised as instructions. Change the light bulb to warm on gray days. Keep flowers even when no one is visiting. Say yes when you can. Say sorry when you are wrong. Back at the house, routine tried to swallow the miracle. Victor's emails multiplied. The legal team wanted signatures. The chef was in a quarrel with the fishmonger about the ethics of tuna. Adrian found, to his own astonishment, that he wanted to sit with Maya and listen to the rest of the recordings before he did anything else. He excused himself from 2 meetings, postponed a third, and in the space that opened, secrets came to stand in the doorway and clear their throats. Late that night, while Adrian and Maya, side by side on the study floor, listened to Elise tell a story about losing her place in a long score and finding it again by pretending she had meant the detour, a small shape slid through the half-open door. It was a cat gray, precise, with eyes like polished coins. It padded to the piano bench, leaped, and curled up as if this had always been its house. Adrian blinked. "Is that?" Maya laughed, delighted and horrified. "I think that's your camera glitch." Theo, small and pajamaed, appeared next, clutching a bag of dry food. He looked between them, between the cat and the recorder, and the open door, and the fact of being found. And then he did something that rearranged Adrian's idea of him again. He said distinctly, "Her babies are in the cellar." He had a voice like a reed instrument, thin and honest, and capable of cutting you. They went, all three, the cat trotting ahead like a guide. Behind the wine racks, in a nest of old blankets, Theo had smuggled down one piece at a time, lay 3 kittens like commas again, tiny and improbable, and so alive they seemed to give off heat like small lanterns. The door ajar at 2:14 a.m., the camera blinking out as if politely looking away. The anomalies had been mercy disguised as mischief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Adrian asked, equal parts exasperation and awe, his voice finding a register he didn't use with brokers or bankers. Theo's gaze skittered. He pressed his hand to the cat's flank and said something too small to hear. Maya translated without patronizing him, because he thought you would say no, and he already heard too many no's from the world. Adrian crouched until their eyes were level. Pain opened in his knees, a mortal complaint that seemed important to feel. "Sometimes I say no because I am afraid," he said, and felt how much he meant it. The second secret did not meow. It arrived as a spreadsheet. An analyst from compliance, a woman with a voice like a paper cut, sent a note to Adrian that said, in corporate dialect, that someone had been using the camera outages to move not kittens, but numbers. A quiet siphon from the charitable arms discretionary fund, a drip, drip, drip that amounted, over a year, to something you could buy a boat with. The access trail, like all trails designed by people who think they are smarter than everyone else, pointed to a corner office. Victor, it would have been almost funny if it hadn't braided so neatly with the incidents in the house and with Victor's insistence on optics and cauterization. He had papered his theft with skepticism about compassion. He had counted on Adrian being too ashamed of needing softness to notice. The third secret was older and came with a paper smell. In the last of Elise's envelopes was a photocopy of a hospital form with names blacked out except one Maya Rivera. Under procedures, the line read, "Emergency O negative transfusion." Under notes, Elise had written, in a tilt that wavered only once, "Maya stayed. Everyone else left." Theo slept. Maya held the paper as if it might burn her. "I didn't know she kept this." Her voice was an astonished whisper. "It was before I worked here. I was at the clinic donating because it paid for bus passes. They shouted for O negative, and I gave." "Victor will not like any of this," Maya said at last, dry, practical. "No," Adrian agreed, equally dry. "Victor does not like kittens, music, or evidence, or women he cannot control," she added, "or men who learn to say sorry." Adrian finished. The day the house almost burned began like a promise and ended like a lesson. Morning fitted itself neatly into its boxes, breakfast at 8, an investor call at 9, an appointment with the foundation's auditors at 10 moved up because the paper-cut-voiced analyst had sent another note bold enough to be a shout. Adrian went to the office in a suit he didn't notice wearing. Maya stayed at the house because Theo's school had a half day and because the kittens were almost ready to be moved, and moving them felt like a celebration. Adrian met his eyes. They should. Careful, Victor said, still smiling. If you invite wolves, don't complain when they eat the furniture. Adrian felt something in himself turn like a key. No more favors, he said. It sounded like a vow. We'll let the light in. At nearly 3, as if on cue, the sky cracked like a plate. The first flash lit the study from the inside, turning the piano's black lacquer into a mirror. The second boom rattled the cellar door. The third made the power flicker. Off, on, off again, like a heartbeat trying to decide. The generator coughed awake. Valiant, but somewhere, in the oldest part of the house. The wiring objected. Smoke has a personality. It crawls first, tasting corners. It licks the ceiling and then decides. When the alarm shrieked, it was almost dainty, an offended bird. Maya grabbed Theo's hand and the kitten box handle. Train, she said, but her voice thinned because the smoke had reached it. Theo, sing our train sound. He did 2 notes, sweet and ridiculous and braver than the siren, and the sound cut a corridor through fear. They made it to the foyer as the east wing, the wing with the shuttered rooms no one used. Let out a cough like a giant, then a whoomp, fire likes old wood. It remembers. Maya put the kitten box in a laundry cart and shoved it toward the door. She hit the wall panel that unlocked the front doors. Nothing happened. Security. Override engaged. Please enter code. The screen blinked. She had no code. Only 2 people had that code. She grabbed the emergency phone. The line was live. The operator on the other end started to recite a script. Over the operator's voice, a new voice came, bright as a blade, and wrong in this smoke. Victor, patched in by the security firm he had set up years ago. House lockdown, engaged, due to intrusion detection. He said, smooth. Protocol requires confirmation by authorized personnel. Adrian is en route. Maya hung up on him and looked at Theo, who looked back with the clear trust that makes people brave. She grabbed the laundry cart again and headed for the side entrance through the service corridor. The house was a maze she knew as well as the back of her hand now. In the corridor, a door had been propped open with a folded cardboard box. Drafts did the rest. Smoke rolled low, eager. She wet a dishcloth at the sink, pressed it to Theo's mouth, found another for herself. They pushed on. In the service corridor, they made the side door just as a ceiling panel. Tired of pretending to be a lid, fell in a shower of sparks. Stand back, she told Theo, who stood forward. She rammed the cart. The glass cracked like ice, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, the pain gave. She knocked out the remaining shards with a broom handle and wrapped a towel around the jagged frame. She lifted Theo through the hole and then the kitten box. And then, because the smoke had decided to run now, fast and low, she climbed out herself, turning her shoulders sideways to make her body smaller than it was. They were in the courtyard, rain slanting, air like medicine. Theo coughed until his whole body trembled. Sirens swelled. Adrian arrived the way thunder sometimes does suddenly. Everywhere. He ran without elegance. A man who had taught his body it didn't have to do this. He reached them and reached for Theo, and then stopped because his hands were shaking. Maya put Theo's hand into his, and the shaking stopped. Just like that. A circuit closed. The doors. He gasped. The system override, Maya said. Victor. Heat surged behind her. She turned, and in that instant saw the small gray cat streak along the base of the wall and slip back through the broken pane into the smoke. No, Theo said. The kind of no that is older than language. He pulled free and ran for a heartbeat. The world narrowed to one moving boy. A hole in a door. And a decision. Maya didn't think. She ran. She ducked through the hole, cloth over her mouth, and the house took her back, hot and bright and angry. Inside, the service corridor was a second river of smoke. The cat had vanished, a ghost smearing across low air. Maya dropped to her knees, lungs burning, and called with the ugly mew that stray cats learn to trust. The cat's eyes appeared, twin coins in a slot, and then the small body came, trembling with the effort of continuing to exist. Maya scooped the cat and turned, and in the turning, something large fell in the hall behind her with a noise like a door ending. Heat grazed her back like a hand. For a moment, she wanted to lie down and let the heat be the whole story. Then she thought of Elise's voice saying, "Preparation is not surrender." And she crawled, then stood, then shoved herself through the jagged hole into rain. Adrian caught her as she stumbled. The firefighter caught the cat. Theo, square and rigid with fear and relief, made his train sound, and then a hiccup, and then a sob that had waited 2 years to be born. It came out raw and hopeful and mortal and human. And Adrian, who had been a statue with a bank account, became a father with a mouth, and kissed his son's hair the way he hadn't let himself do enough, and said aloud, to the sky and to the woman coughing rain beside him, "I'm sorry." The firefighters took the east wing like a chess problem. Water rose and smoke fell. Victor arrived late enough to be tactical, brandishing concern and legalese. He put a hand on Adrian's shoulder and began. Security did what it should. Adrian turned, wet and black with ash in a way that made him impossible to argue with. You locked them in. It was protocol. An intrusion flag tripped. We cannot open a house to a burglar because a maid panics during a small electrical. Say small one more time, Adrian said, his voice, finally, like the winter he carried. And you will be very far from this house. Victor lifted his palms. Faux peace. You're emotional, understandable. For once, Adrian didn't swallow the word. Yeah, he said. I am. That's what you call it when a person decides to care. If you had asked the house to point to its heart then, it would have chosen the courtyard, a man calling himself back to his name, a child softening in the rain, a woman holding a cat like an umbrella with claws. The east wing would take months to repair, the fire chief said, but the main house was sound. Smoke sketched itself into the drapes and then, grudgingly, let the laundress persuade it to leave. The kittens went to the vet in a carrier borrowed from the gardener. The gray mother cat fell asleep at the foot of Theo's bed as if she had been hired. Rain rinsed the courtyard until it reflected clouds. The house smelled like wet stone and lemon polish and broth. Maya's broth, because she had shown up the next morning with a pot and the command. Sip, and Adrian, for once, obeyed. The auditors did not bring flowers, but they brought sentences that bloomed in a different way. Unauthorized transfers, conflict of interest, insider enrichment. They laid the trail like breadcrumbs that led to the same dark cottage Victor's office. The siphon had begun modestly and then grown bolder, as greed does when it's rewarded. Worse than the money was what the money had been meant to do: fund after-school programs, expand the community center Elise had loved, keep the music rooms open when donors got bored. Adrian did not gloat. The past weeks had sanded something off him that gloating would only scar. He sat with Maya in the study now aired, its surfaces less afraid of fingerprints, and told her the whole truth, as if truth were a chessboard that they were going to set up together. He told her how he had loved Victor once, the way you love the person you think you might have to become. He told her how, after the funeral, he had put his heart into a vault and given Victor the combination. He told her how that had worked until it didn't. Maya listened the way she cleaned in layers, lightly at first and then to the corners. She did not say what a different woman might have said, "I told you so." She said, instead, "Sometimes we choose guards because we mistake locked doors for safety." He laughed, short and grateful. "Elise would like you." "She liked me," Maya said, and let the sentence sit between them like a candle. She slid a manila envelope across the desk. "There's one more letter. For you. I think you should read it alone." Changes after that came quick as summer tomatoes. The foundation's discretionary fund was reconstituted with a board that included 3 people who knew the price of bus tickets. The community center received a check big enough to keep Saturdays with Lissy alive for a decade, and to rename the main room not after a donor, but after a phrase, Songs for Storms. The security firm's contract was reassigned, and the new company sent a woman in steel-toed boots who asked Maya for a tour and took notes on where the house had been unkind. Maya's schedule changed. 2. "Not a maid," Adrian said one afternoon. "Awkward as a teenager, if you want. Something else, something new." He had practiced in the mirror and hated himself for practicing, but he needed to get it right. "With this job," he said, gesturing around the sheet music, the kitten asleep in a sunstripe, the piano wearing its lid like an invitation. "Keep the music near my boy. Keep the house kind. Tell me when I am wrong. Accept that I will be wrong a lot." She pretended to consider benefits: full, health, dental, vision, a ridiculous number of vacation days that you will not take. "So I will force you to take them." "Child care, on site," he stopped. "If you want." She did want. Not as charity, as structure. The twins explored the safer parts of the house with the determination of explorers naming peaks. Theo watched them with the fascination of someone who remembers being that small and is relieved to find he is not. He began to talk more, words appearing like volunteers at a festival when the sun comes out. He still liked small words, yes, no, mine, stay, but sometimes, unprompted, he said Dad, and sometimes he said Maya. And once, washing his hands while the mother cat supervised from the counter, he said home, and no one corrected him. One evening in late autumn, when the ocean had gone from sparkling to thinking, they held a small ceremony in the study. It wasn't a party. Parties were for share prices. This was for a room that had learned to breathe again. The head housekeeper brought flowers and pretended it was because the florist had over-ordered. The new security lead stood in the doorway and admired the new panic bars that opened outward with a shove. Adrian spoke last. He held no notes. He wore a sweater, ordinary as air. "This room had a mouth," he said, looking at the piano, "and it was closed for too long." He looked at Theo, at Maya, at the twins already sticky with juice. "Thank you to the person who opened it." He didn't say Maya's name because he didn't need to. The room knew it. He turned to the recorder and pressed play. And Elise's laugh spilled out and filled the corners. I meant it, he said later on the terrace. The night the kind you call clear, because you can finally see what was always there. About telling me when I'm wrong. She handed him a mug. You were wrong about the color of the music room rugs. The new ones are friendlier. He looked down, startled he had not noticed the change, and laughed. Okay, lesson 1. Everyone is right about kittens, she said, and they stood, not touching, but some distance had been shortened forever. The question between them, that ancient whether, did not need to be answered yet. There were time and Tuesdays for that. For now, there was a boy who said dad without fear and Maya without asking permission. There were twins who would someday climb the piano bench and make art out of noise. There was a house that had learned kind. There was a foundation that had remembered its foundation. There was a letter tucked into a book that no longer made Adrian weak, but made him strong in a new direction. On the first real cold day, when the ocean wore its winter face and the air tasted thin, Theo tugged at Adrian's sleeve. Train, he said. And when Adrian crouched, Theo put his mouth to Adrian's ear and upgraded the word. Family. Adrian's eyes closed for a moment, not in pain. He felt his heart unlock the vault door and step into its own house. He opened his eyes and found Maya watching him, a question and an answer in the same look. He nodded. They went inside, where the air was warm and smelled like cinnamon and soap and possibility. Before bed, they played one of Elise's songs for storms. Maya took the lower notes because she said it felt like pushing a swing. Adrian took the melody and surprised himself by not fumbling. Theo sat between them and placed a hand on each of their wrists as if he were a conductor, and they the orchestra. When the song ended, he didn't clap. He looked at the room and said, in the small voice that had made the first crack and could now carry a whole roof, stay. It was not a command. It was a hope. It was a lesson. And for once, Adrian did not bargain with it, did not push it to later, did not mistake it for weakness. He nodded and answered the way you answer a question that matters with your whole life. Yes, he said. We stay. The ocean kept its own beat. The house, like a chest, rose and fell somewhere. A kitten yawned. Above them, the night endless, indifferent. Generous made room for this small promise, which was also, improbably, a kind of wealth.